Good evening and welcome to this workshop of the Board of Education. Tonight, the board will hear updates from Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Mark Bedell, and his staff on school system data related to the recently released Maryland report card. Somebody's trying to get in, I believe. Tonight's workshop is open to the public, but no public questions or testimony will be taken. This workshop is being broadcast live on ACPS TV, which can be found on Channel 96 on Comcast and Astound, and Channel 36 on Verizon. High-definition broadcasts can be seen on Channel 996 on Comcast, Channel 496 on Astound, and Channel 1961 on Verizon. The workshop can also be viewed live on ACPS YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Bedell.
All right. Thank you, Madam President. We are excited to have an opportunity to go into the accountability system. It's in essence our deep data dive for the school board and for the community. And as you all know, the analyzing of data is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I think Mr. Dykstra and I really hit it off early on, just around you taking advantage of these opportunities to learn from this data. But I want to also make sure that I just set some context. I know Mr. Dykstra and his staff will go through the presentation, but just for the community's consumption, we've gone through 3 iterations of landmark education law, one being the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1965, the second one coming in 2002 with No Child Left Behind, where that was truly a focus on eliminating student achievement gaps and focusing on student groups. And then in 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the current iteration that we currently operate on. We also know that many school districts across the country were impacted by the pandemic that hit all of us in 2020, in essence, shutting down schools across the United States. And even when schools re-entered back into session, we had a number of students who were out due to illness related to either COVID or just the common cold. So what you're going to have an opportunity to see today is data from a school district that has now been back in session a full year. The data is lagging, but I think you will also see in this data that our goal was to be very transparent with this community, as I have been from day one, to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. You will also find in this data that there is a lot to be proud of in terms of where we are as a school district and where we're heading. And so with that, I will pass it over to Jason Dykstra and his staff to take us through this workshop.
Great. Thank you so much. So Dr. Tobin, Mr. Silkworth, members of the board, and Dr. Bedell, for the record, I am Jason Dykstra, Executive Director of Instructional Data. I am joined here today by two amazing members of our accountability team, and I will let each one of them introduce themselves.
Good evening. I'm Anna Harding. I'm an accountability data administrator.
Good evening. I'm Melissa Souter, and I do the same thing as Anna.
Great. So we're really, really thrilled to be here with you tonight. It's maybe not the most exciting topic that you guys get to deal with, but to us, it's really exciting. So we like this kind of stuff, and we're really thrilled to have an opportunity to go over some of this.
No
Good,
worries.
good. So before we get started with our presentation tonight, we want to remind you about some common acronyms that you'll see with state accountability. And so they're up on your screen. We've also provided you a copy of those terms and definitions. So you'll see any number of those acronyms throughout our presentation tonight. Probably obvious, but our regulations and current strategic plans support accountability, meeting state requirements, and most importantly, eliminating the achievement gaps, which is really the primary goal of ESSA. So let's begin with a little history. Dr. Bedell just keyed in on this very well. And so accountability has been around for a long, long time. And we've been dealing with this in one shape or another for quite a while, at least my entire career. And so, but there's changes. So ESSA looks a little bit different than No Child Left Behind. So Dr. Bedell alluded to the fact that No Child Left Behind was really the first piece of legislation that forced all schools and school districts to look at data, testing data specifically by student group, and really was the goal of to eliminate achievement gaps. And so that was really historic. ESSA does that and more. So ESSA really takes the opportunity and really looks at lots of different metrics besides testing. So you're going to see testing tonight, but you're going to see lots of other data points and metrics and components that are part of ESSA. So that really is the most recent legislation that we are kind of operating on. So when we take a look at where we are in this timeline, you need to recognize that we are very, very early into the ESSA timeline. Actually, this is only our third state report card because of the pandemic. So it was approved, as Dr. Bedell said, in 2015, but they actually gave schools and school districts a couple years to figure it out. And so our plan was approved in 2018. And so that's actually when, that school year 17-18 is when we got our first report card. So they used 16-17 as our baseline. We did get a report card after the 18 school year. We got a report card after the 19 school year. We all know what happened in 20. We all know what happened in 2021. And then this is, as Dr. Bedell said, this is very lagging data. So the data you're going to see tonight is actually from spring of 22. So we have to keep that in mind, right? So we're here in spring of 23, okay? And we're already testing. So we have elementary and middle schools that are already giving the Maryland Integrated Science Assessment right now. There's no doubt that we have students in Anne Arundel County Public Schools give the test today, right? There's just no doubt. And so this is now our third report card. So one thing that they did do is they pushed everything back. So originally, again, this was a very long-term piece of legislation. So it was slated to go through 2030. And because of COVID now, they are going to go ahead and extend it to 2032. So we are very, very early in this process. So here you're going to see what we refer to as the ESSA house. So in order to better understand ESSA and the state accountability system, AACPS developed and uses the analogy of a house. We will look at both the floors of the house and also the rooms of the house, which represent different metrics and components of the state report card. So in this graphic, you'll see that there's really 4 levels to the house. The foundation of the house we refer to as school quality. Those are indicators according to the state. The middle, that second floor or middle part of the house, we refer to as school progress. EL refers to our English learner proficiency. And then the top of a house is performance, right? That's for us, we're probably the most comfortable. That's test scores, right? That's where testing kind of lives. And so we use the house because we find with so many different data points and metrics, it's a lot easier to understand the entire report card. So let's dig into the house here a little bit. So what you're going to see here is the left side of the graphic here is elementary and middle school, and the right-hand side is the house for high school. So the first thing you're going to notice is they're very similar, right? They all have similar types of rooms, but there are a couple of very small differences. So I will start you on the green level, or the second level of the house on the left-hand side. That's for our elementary and middle schools, and you will notice that there is a room called growth on ELA and math that's worth 25%. Or 25 points. It's out of 100, so it's 25 points. And you'll notice that you don't find that room in high school. So if you glance to the right-hand side in the green rooms, you will see that high schools have something different. They have graduation rate and on track for 9th grade. So those are differences. And you might ask yourself, well, why is that? Why are those rooms different? So pretty straightforward answer. In elementary and middle school, we give the test to students each year. So we test 3rd graders, 4th graders, and 5th graders. And we, in middle school, test 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders. Well, if I have more than one test score, I can measure growth. In high school, students are only required to take the test one time. So there is no such thing as growth in high schools. So things that have always been important to high schools has certainly been graduation rate. This board and Dr. Bedell, we've been focused on that forever, before even we needed an accountability system. But they also then added on the on track for 9th grade. We know from research, when students are successful in 9th grade, the odds of them earning the diploma is really off the charts. It's very, very, very high. So those are the key differences. The other key difference I will bring to your attention is there are a couple of rooms that are different with respect to how much they count. So bottom of the house, identically the same. And if you go from the bottom of the house to the top of the house, right, what you're going to see is that testing is a little bit weighted a little bit more in high school than it is in middle school. But most of the rooms are about the same number of points. But you can see from this graphic, we went from just test scores to lots of other data points and metrics that kind of comprise a school's report card. And we want to kind of dig into that a little bit for you. This is actually the exact same, basically the same slide as the previous slide, but I did it in a chart format. So if you look in the middle of the chart, that's where you'll see those differences in that green level, or that second level of that house, that second floor. And so notice then on the left, elementary and middle schools have a green square for growth on English language arts and math. And then if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that the high schools have a green square for graduation rate and on track for 9th grade. All the other rooms exist in both houses. So those are kind of the similarities. So it's just a different way of looking at the state accountability system. And again, this house is an Anne Arundel County creation. It's an analogy, and we've found it very useful for our stakeholders to kind of understand all the different things that kind of go into a report card. So let's step inside the houses. So as the pilot says, on a very bumpy flight, you may want to tighten up those seat belts for the next few minutes. All right. So Ms. Harding's going to be reviewing the bottom 2 floors of the ESSA house, and Ms. Sauter will be reviewing the top 2 floors of the ESSA house.
I anticipate very little turbulence. It's going to be fine. Good evening. I'm going to take you through the bottom level of the house to start, the first of which is chronic absenteeism. I framed each house or each room of the house kind of through a question. So if you will, this room is asking what % of students are not chronically absent. It's a little bit of an interesting nomenclature, so I'm going to repeat it. What % of students, or what % of students are not chronically absent? So chronically absent means that a student is absent 10% or more of the time they're enrolled in a school. This room counts towards 15 points for all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high. And a student counts in this room if they are enrolled in a school 10 or more days. So think about that. A student could be in a school 10 days and then go to a different school 10 days and a different school 10 days, and they would count for each of the schools in which they were enrolled 10 or more days. You earn an assigned point value based on the % of students not chronically absent. The scoring methodology in this room is based on an assigned score table. So for example, if a school had 85% of students not chronically absent, they earn 13 points based off of that table. The second room of the house at the bottom, surveying. Oh, I want to return to absenteeism for one thing. Absenteeism is whether you're excused or unexcused. They count you the same. That is a common misconception that excused absences don't count. That is not true. So if it's excused or unexcused, you are absent regardless, and so you count accordingly in that room. As we move on to the survey, you'll notice that there's 10 points possible, 7 of which are aligned to students and 3 of which are aligned to educators. The survey is broken down into 4 domains. Those domains are safety, environment, community, and relationships. There is one additional domain for educators. That's instructional feedback support. Students in grades 5 through 11 take the survey, and if they are in the building during the survey administration, they count. So think about that. If I come to school on a Monday enrolled in a new building and the survey is being administered on Tuesday, I will count in that room. So it's just enrollment during the administration of the survey to count. The scores are indexed through a statistical calculation and the points are awarded accordingly. The next room here is opportunities access to a well-rounded curriculum. Say that 3 times fast. That's a mouthful. And what I want to help you understand here is this is just, the question you're asking is, are students taking the classes that they should? This is applicable to all 3 accountability spans, elementary, middle, and high. And membership here is a little bit different than the previous 2 rooms. So I want to call that out. You'll see it abbreviated on the slide as FAE. And if you refer back to the acronym there, that's full academic year. And what that means is they're with a school from September 30th through April 15th in the 21-22 school year. Elementary and middle and high school all vary slightly. So if you don't mind, we'll progress right to the next slide and talk about those differences. At the elementary school level, this is looking at the percent of 5th graders that are enrolled in science, social studies, fine arts, physical education, and health. It's important to note that and there, they have to be in all 5 of those to count for this room. This is something that we do according to our program of study at elementary. At the middle, it's slightly different. It's the percent of 8th graders this time, but here they only have to do all 4 of the areas listed, fine arts, physical education, health, and computational learning, but it's at any point throughout their middle school career. So I could have taken art in 6th grade, fine arts in 7th grade, and the last 2 in 8th grade and still have counted. In high school, it's the percent of graduating seniors that are enrolled in an AP or IB course, or dually enrolled, or doing a career technology education concentrator. So again, just note the difference here. You have ampersands, ands for elementary and middle. You have an or at the high school level. And so they are all full academic year. The next room we're going to shift to is specific to just the 2 high school domains. For on track 9th grade, that's 5 points at the high school. Again, you're seeing that FAE concept. So students have to be in the building from September 30th to April 15th. And this is the percent of 9th grade students that earn credit in specified areas. Those areas are math, English, science, social studies, and world language. The next one is graduation rate, which Mr. Dykstra referred to earlier. This one's a little bit trickier on membership. This is the same cohort model that we've been using for years. It's important to recognize, though, that when we're talking about the report card from 21-22, that it's the cohort of 9th graders who entered in 17-18, because this room is composed of 15 points, 10 of which are allotted to the 4-year graduation rate, and 5 points which are allotted to the 5-year graduation rate. So if you don't make it in the 4 years, we still want you to graduate, and we give you credit in that 5th year. Sliding right along to the growth room. Really, this room is asking, how did students grow from the fall of 21? So if you recall, we assessed in the fall of 21, assessing the academic year 2021, to the spring of 22, which assessed the 21-22 material. So kids took 2 standardized assessments last year, in the fall, assessing the previous year, and the spring, assessing 21-22. So to count in this room, you had to be enrolled the full academic year, but you also have to have 2 consecutive scores to be considered for the growth room. This is just applicable to elementary and middle, like Mr. Dykstra referred to earlier. And the way that they do this is they assign each student a growth score. They determine the school's average growth score by both ELA and math. They look at what percent of schools in the state of Maryland that you did better than, and then they apply that percentile into a formula. The math geeks are real excited. Just trust us for everybody else, okay? All right, and then credit for well-rounded curriculum. Again, this is another one of the rooms that has a lot of verbiage in the title. Think for this one, the last one was, is it on their schedule, right? Are they taking it? This room is, how did they do in those courses? So this one differs slightly between elementary, middle, and high, just like the previous one. But what you need to know before we progress is it's, again, full academic year, 9:30 to 4:15. It's 10 points for elementary and middle, 5 points for high school. So when we jump to the next slide here, you'll see how that is. And kind of think back, it's similar to the other slide. But now it's the percent of fifth graders that are passing social studies, fine arts, physical education, and health. So again, the previous room was, am I taking the course? Now it's, am I passing it? This is also where you're going to see the MCAP science assessment, the MESA assessment, Maryland Integrated Science Assessment. 5 points at the elementary level are the percent of students that are proficient on that exam. As we slide over into middle school, same idea. I'm looking at the 8th grade students, but now it's the percent of 8th grade students that are passing math, ELA, social studies, and science, and that's taken in their 8th grade year. You'll see 3.5 points here aligned to the MESA that they take in 8th grade. There will eventually be a Maryland social studies assessment that did not count in 21-22, so that room is typically 10 points, but for this year alone was 6.5 points possible. And last but not least, the high school room with 5 points here on credit for well-rounded curriculum, thinking about proficiency. So the percent of graduating seniors that were proficient on AP, IB, SAT, ACT, you see the list. You also, that is one way to count, or you could also have a dual enrollment status, or you could be a UMD entry requirement, which most of our students are when they graduate. There's also the Career Technology Education Apprenticeship certification through an MSDE approved program, or the Seal of Biliteracy. It's a mouthful. Perfect. I'm going to pass it along.
Good evening. So as Mr. Dykstra alluded to earlier, I'm going to talk to you about the testing rooms. And those are probably the ones we feel most comfortable with, the ones that have been around the longest, I think. And to dovetail with what Ms. Harding was saying about starting with a question, we're going to start with the progress in achieving English language proficiency. And the question I really want you to think about is, are our English learners making significant growth towards their command of the English language? And this applies to elementary, middle, or high school students. And you need to have 10 students that to be in that room, and they all have to have at least 2 test scores. As a side note, we often refer to the test as WIDA. It's actually called Access. So if you either hear Access or WIDA, we're talking about the same thing. And there are 3 ways to count as proficient in this room. The first is the one that we're all hoping for, our end goal, right, is the student receives a 4.5 composite score and therefore is exited from the program, which is our goal. But there are 2 other ways, because learning an English language is not a straight trajectory. So one way is to make an annual target. So they compare the score that you earned in 21-22 to a test in one of the 2 previous years. And if you reached your target based on that baseline, then you count as proficient. And then the other is to reach a certain amount of growth after 2 or more years. And so there are 3 ways to reach that, as long as you have 10 students in that room. Okay, and that's worth 10 possible points. The next is MCAP, and that is worth 20 points for elementary and middle school and 30 points for high school. Those points are divided equally between English and math, and they are also full academic year. So the student had to be enrolled between September 30th and April 15th and have a test in that subject area. So each of those areas, English and math, are divided twice. One part of that, so let's take, for example, middle school, so 5 points of that would be the percent proficient, which I think we all understand. The new MCAP tests are out of 4 levels. So they would be earning a 3 or a 4 on MCAT to be considered proficient. And the other half of that room is averaging. So what they do is they take all of the different PLD levels that you earned in your school, and they average it up. So let's say in my school, I earned a 3.5 out of 4 as my average. They scale that up to a 5-point scale, and that would be a 4.4. They do that both for English and math. One consideration this year, however, is that in math, students could use their math score in the SAT to count towards this room. So that could count towards the percent proficient. They have scores, cutoff scores for SAT for math. However, obviously they don't report SAT with levels, right? 1, 2, 3, or 4. So they did not count in that part of the math room in high school. And we used 11th graders this year instead of 12th graders as we have in the past, just to get a significant number of students who have taken the test. So it is likely in some high schools that you may see an NA in the math average part, because most of their students may have their scores through SAT. Or if you do see a score there, it may be because based on a smaller group of kids, because they had a smaller N value take that test. So that's just a consideration. We anticipate that that will impact our test scores for the next few years on that. All of this data is available on the state website, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dykstra to explain that.
Great. All right, we're back to smooth sailing now. Can loosen up those seat belts. The bumpy part of the ride is now over. So as Ms. Souter said, all of this data that we just went over can be seen on the state website, mdreportcard.org. Again, just remember that we use the analogy of a house, so you're really not going to see that when you go on to the state report card. So you can search the district, you can search a school, you can look at any district in the state, et cetera. And so here are just a couple of screenshots of actual state report cards. So they call them indicators. For us, that's floors of the house, right? We have rooms, and they within each indicator will show the exact breakdown of all the points in those rooms. And so it's all there. It'll break down all the points earned in each room, including by student group, whether there has been improvement in that room since the last report card. So everything that we put in our house for schools and our stakeholders is on the state report card. It's multiple pages. And again, it literally breaks down all 100 points, every indicator, every metric. It does it across the board, and you can go on there and see anything that's going on. At the very top of the report card, they have several pieces of information that most people are certainly very curious about. The first is, what's the star rating? So all of our schools get categorized into stars. So 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And so that is at the top right-hand part of the report card. It shows you very definitively where you're at. In addition, what they also do is, if we jump to the bottom of this screen and you look at your overall score, so every report card will show you the percent of the points that you actually earned out of 100, or if provided you had points in every room. So they give you the percent that you got on that report card, and that determines your star rating. But they also give you a percentile rank. And so when we take a look at that percentile rank, we got to be careful, because that's not the percent on your report card. What they actually do is, within each level, they rank every school in the state of Maryland from highest to lowest, and then they give them a percentile, and they look at it. So on this particular example, a little hard to see, but this school is at 72. And so what that really means is, this school, whatever level they are, elementary, middle, or high, this school did 72% better than all other schools in Maryland. So it's different than your report card percentage, but it's also very interesting to see how you compared accordingly to all schools in the state. So they do include a percentile rank. So how do we get a star rating? Again, it's based on the percent you get on your report card. So the points you earn out of 100. And so here's the breakdown of stars. Give you a second to take a look at that. There's been no change to that. Again, this is our third report card, and they have not changed the star rating system since the first report card prior to COVID. So why we're here tonight? How did we do? What is our current status in the ACPS? So you've seen this. We released this information. Here's a chart kind of showing a breakdown by level of all of our schools and how they did on the state report card by 5 stars, 4 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, and 1. 95% of our schools got a 3 or higher star. That compares to the state at about 75%. So we're certainly very happy about that. In addition, we had 14 schools improve their star rating from 2019. And unfortunately, we did also have 15 schools that lost 1 star. But we do have some good news, some really good news. And this is thanks to Dr. Bedell. He said, hey, how many schools do we have close to moving up? So we went and did a little homework, and we have 24 schools that are actually within 3 points of being to the next star level. That's significant. That's a really good number. So provided that we keep improving the way we think we are going to improve, we're going to have a lot of schools moving up, and we're already in as I told him so I told Dr. Bedell when the report cards came out, I said, we're all things considered with everything that this district has dealt with COVID and the interruptions to education, we're at a pretty good starting point. We're not where we want to be, but we're at a pretty good starting point. So that's kind of where we stand right now. So a lot of numbers on this screen. So let's kind of just take a look at how we fall compared to some other districts. So we'll look at, again, as you know now that you're experts on ESSA and our state accountability system, right? We do it all by level, right? Because each level kind of has a little twist in each room, so we don't compare across levels. So let's take a look at elementary real quick. A lot of numbers on that screen. We're okay. I'm going to direct you to the far right-hand column. That is the total number of points that Anne Arundel County Public Schools earned out of 100 points for our elementary schools. So that puts us 9th in the state. Okay. And what I want to bring your attention to is that, you know what? We're only a couple of points off from being in the top 3. And so we're knocking on the door. We're not far. When you look at the distribution of that right-hand column, we're not far off kind of where we want to be. So it puts us 9th, but again, a couple of points here and there on a report card could really make a big difference for how we're doing compared to some other districts in the state. When we take a look at middle schools, we're also 9th. However, when you look at that right-hand column, now those other columns, by the way, are floors of the house. Okay, the state calls them indicators, right? We call them floors of the house. So that's those other rooms. And I have a little summary table coming, so you don't have to look at those. But when you look at that last column, notice we're a little further away at the middle school level, okay, than we are at the elementary level. So still within 4 or 5% of being where we want to be, but a little further away than our elementary counterparts. Again, still ranked 9th. When we look at high school, 12th in the state, and again, a little bit further yet away from being in the top 3. So you can see that we're at 60.1 for the points that we earned out of 100 at the high school level, placing us kind of right in the middle of the pack in the state. And again, just a little bit further than we would like away from being in the top 3. So that's kind of a big summary of the distribution of report cards across all of the districts in the state. And this chart right here is kind of takes those last 3 slides and puts them all in one. So what you're really looking at here is by level, the indicators, the floors of the house, right? And you can look across and you can see what percent of the points the district earned in each of the indicators. So you can see where we got most of our points, and you can also see where we didn't earn as many points as what we wanted. So a couple themes on this. Obviously, with the exception of our English learners' proficiency, academic achievement, tends to be a little lower than the other indicators, the other floors of the house. Again, and then you will also see that, it stands out where we really need to take a look at our English learners at the secondary level as well. So that basically is just kind of a summary of the district performance on the most recent report card. So we all know that testing still comprises a significant part of the report card. So it's not the only part, which is good news from No Child Left Behind, but it's still a significant part. So we have 3 slides to show you that kind of shows how did we do on the state assessment, right? We had all this interruption. This was really the first testing session that we've had since having students back full-time into school. So this is elementary. On the left-hand column, you'll see English Language Arts. On the right-hand column, you will see mathematics, and you can see the percent proficient on that right-hand column and where we fell within the state. So for elementary, we ranked 9th out of the state, above state average. And one of the things you're going to notice very quickly is that, and all the next three slides, elementary, middle, and high, is that the math scores are going to be lower than the English language arts scores. That is not only true in Anne Arundel County Public Schools, that is true in Maryland, and that is true across the nation. So you will notice that pattern when you glance at some of these proficiency scores on these two tables. So for math, we are 12th in the state, just above state average for elementary math. When we move to middle school, we see that we finished 10th in the state for both ELA and math. For English language arts on MCAP, again, these scores are from spring of 22. So starting next month, we'll be giving these exams again. So again, it's very lagging data, and we're going to have a new data set that we're going to actually be very interested in seeing so that we can quickly compare the second testing since coming back from COVID to this test, and hopefully we'll get those results back a whole lot quicker. Again, I will point out to you that if you glance very quickly at the math proficiency scores, they are significantly lower than the English language arts. And then when we look at high school, we finished 13th on English 10. That's English 10. ELA for high school is English 10. So again, above state average, we came in 13th. And when we take a look at math at the high school level, that is Algebra 1, and we finished 9th. And so Ms. Souter, as she said in her remarks when she was talking about that performance room, our seniors were granted waivers. So we did not have really any seniors that really needed to take the mandatory state test. So they actually looked at the junior class to get this data. So you'll notice that we didn't have a lot of actual test takers compared to what we normally have. So again, you'll see that the math scores on Algebra 1 are lower than the English 10 scores at the high school level. So where does that get us? Well, as Dr. Bedell said in his introductory remarks, there's a lot that we're very happy about. We think we're at a very good starting point. First, we always expect to be above state averages, and we are. We have been proud of our graduation rate. We continue to be proud of our graduation rate. Our high schools did a really nice job in the room readiness for post-secondary success. So we're certainly very excited about that. A lot of points were earned on the report card in that particular level of the house. And our middle schools also did well in school quality and student success, that purple level of the house. Very pleased with the bottom two. We're trending back in the right direction. So when you see growth in students, we get excited, right? We get really, that's a great sign. And we saw that in elementary school. And now we're hoping to see that trend continue as our students, move into and transition to secondary schools. So we're really excited about the growth in academic progress. And also we saw some really nice growth in our English learners at the elementary level as well. So there's some good news in our report cards, and we're really excited about that. Of course, there's some challenges, right? There's some things that we need to focus on and some things we need to consider. So you've already seen it. We just talked about it. Academic achievement has not really rebounded yet from COVID. And we're just getting back in the testing game. That was the first time in 22. And obviously we can tell from the data that we're not any different than most school districts across the state and the nation, where math achievement took a bigger hit than the English language arts achievement. Also noted the English learner proficiency with respect to our secondary schools. We lost a little ground there. And so we definitely know we need to focus on that area. And we've known for 2 years that attendance has not come back to its pre-pandemic rates. So our chronic attendance rates are significantly higher than what they were prior to the pandemic. Of course, what else implications on this is staffing shortages, right? So when you have new teachers, conditionally certified teachers, et cetera, they may or may not be as familiar with the standards tested. They may or may not have the background in the curriculum, knowledge of the test itself. And so certainly there are implications there. And as we've said a couple of times tonight, and Dr. Bedell says frequently, this is pretty lagging data, and it's pretty hard for a school or a school system to take action on this data, which is why we're really looking forward to really the next set of data and the next report card, so we can really get a great idea of where we're at with some of these data points. And then MCAP, the data reports we get from MCAP, the item analysis is really not all that easy. And it's not as obvious. We do have some access to it, but it's really not I'll call it user friendly. And so we do get some insights that are helpful to teachers and curriculum offices, but it could be better. And we have to work real hard at it. And so we do that with our partners in curriculum and instruction, and we'll continue to do that. But it's not necessarily real easy. Where are we going? Well, we're testing. It's March. And so we've already finished the WIDA Access. So we tested almost 9,000 English learners in January and February. So that's done. March is here. So we're doing the survey currently. Our elementary middle schools are giving the MISA test, the Maryland Integrated Science Assessment, right now. This week, we're giving the SAT to all of our juniors. Really excited about that. So that's Wednesday morning. April's right around the corner. Spring is here. So the survey will continue. And so they'll finish up the survey in April. We'll start the MCAP, ELA, and math testing in April and May. May just speaks for itself. If you're curious if schools are busy in May, I'll just let you read the list and you can go with it, because there's a lot happening in the school on any given day in May. So we continue MCAP testing. Middle schools will be giving the social studies test that Ms. Harding referred to. Our high school students will be taking LS MISA. You have your little cheat sheet, but it's life science MISA. That's basically biology. So they'll be taking that test, and our high school students will be taking their mandatory government test, in addition to lots of AP, IB exams, and our CTE exams. It really depends on timing, but there are a few of them that also occur in May as well. And again, we're being told, and we're excited about the fact that they're promising us not as much lag. So we're going to hold them to that. And Dr. Bedell and I are going to work together and hold them to that. But we're hoping to get the next round of data in the fall. And so that will be much more timely, where we can then respond to it, take action, and do some things. As you know from Dr. Bedell, we're already working on setting some targets for next school year in these different areas. We're obviously going to be working on the creation of a new strategic plan. Obviously, we don't want to see any 1-star or 2-star schools on a report card. So we'll be working very closely with those schools to make sure that they're moving up. 3 of them are within 3% of moving out. So we're really excited about that. And of course, our goal is to be one of the best school districts in the state. And we're going to continue to work on that as well. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dykstra. Thank you all. I know there's a huge amount of work that goes into this, and we're very, very grateful to you for this in-depth analysis, which I think is very valuable to us and to the public. So I will go and roll call order with my colleagues, as is our usual practice. 2 questions, and if there are more, we'll do another round. So tonight, it's always a surprise where we are. Actually, Ms. Ellis, you get to go first tonight.
That was a surprise. I did not know that. Thank you. Thank you for a very thorough presentation. It is very, very helpful to walk through that and understand a little better about what all those numbers mean. Thank you, AACPS, for providing the SAT. My junior is not so excited that it's this week, but I'm I'm very pleased that she'll be taking that during the school day. I don't have a lot of questions, I guess, because for me, so I'm always very wary of the standardization of education. And I know that we're looking at the numbers from a macro level. And like in terms of talking about testing, I always worry about how that's impacting the individual learner when we're so focused on these numbers and data. So, you know, I've been very vocal about that. And I know there's so much nuance in all of those rooms in the house. I think obviously there were some very low scores in a couple of areas that have me concerned and want me to learn more about what goes into those. I know sometimes it could be, it's not actually that our students are doing all that bad, but it's just the way, the things that go into those numbers. But I do, yes, I do see some promising things there. I think the thing that jumped out at me was the fact that our ranking overall fell from elementary to middle to high school. So I'd be interested in knowing that. When I see academic achievement in elementary school, those low numbers don't worry me because the growth is there. And I'm more concerned about how they're progressing all the way through high school. So that all being said, I don't have specific questions. If you have any sort of thoughts based on the things that I'm thinking about, I'd love to hear about it. But
You want to tackle it, or you want me to?
Either one, Dr. Bedell.
All right. So the secondary, because I've had a chance to look at, once the data came out, I obsess over this stuff. So I really try to, I have issues. And I have looked at this data over and over and over and trying to get an understanding of what is happening level by level. And at least for the high school level, what I have come to a conclusion on, and I think we've talked about this in our deep data dives on Friday, even when you did your dry run, is that we have high school students who know that the state assessment doesn't really count. So we as a school system have to do our part to educate our students that it does count, even though it may not harm you in your ability to move on with your post-secondary endeavors, because a lot of these universities aren't, just being very clear with you all, they're not looking at state assessments anymore. They're looking at a body of work. They're looking at how well-rounded students are. And as I've said before, they're not looking at SAT and ACT in some cases. We have to help our kids understand that you doing well on your tests impacts your school district's accreditation, right? It also, when you take the SAT or the ACT, it's important that you do your best under, even though you may know you're going to a university that doesn't accept it, because there's scholarship money tied into that. So I think for us, that's the piece that I have to try to really figure out as we work with our staff, how to get everybody to understand that it is still important on two different fronts. And that's a piece that we just have to work on.
Okay.
I can't speak to middle school that as well. So
no, having gone through the college application process 3 times now, yeah, I mean, I agree with what you say. They're not asking us for our state test scores. Many of them are not asking for the SAT at this point. And you said well-rounded. Yes, that is very important. That is one thing I do worry a bit about, because when we look at all these tests and we look at how focused we are on student achievement, out of the 3 students I have, I've seen that success is largely based on a student who dives deep into something, that they become passionate about something. And it's very hard for a lot of our students to do that when we have all these demands. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Ms. Corkadell.
Thank you, President Tobin, and thank you to the staff for an awesome, and Dr. Bedell, awesome presentation. I'm left with a few questions here. And the first is, I couldn't help but notice, if I pull out Howard County's data, like on page 26, for example, they're a larger district and they're testing less. So
I'm sorry, they're a
They're a
smaller
smaller
district.
I'm sorry. That is correct. No, I was misspeaking. However, they're not that much smaller. And so when I see a number like we tested 7,000 and they tested 4, is there a percentage that we have to check in so that we're actually being compared apples to apples on those exams? In other words, it should be a proportionate and equal percentage of students. Is that being demonstrated? Because they have greater than half of the amount of students that we have, yet their numbers seem a little.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Ms. Corkadell, the expectation from the state is we test all students. So that's the expectation. We come in anywhere between 97 and 99%. I can't speak to other districts as to what they come in at. But, when we give a state assessment It's 3 through 8, grades 3 through 8, whatever that enrollment is, right? And then it is once in high school. High school got a little wonky, as we kind of mentioned to you, because of the waivers that were granted during COVID. That particular group of seniors really had a lot of interruptions if you think about the seniors in 21, 22. So the expectation from the state is that we test all students. So the other thing you have to keep in mind is not every student counts for a report card. So I'm still required to give you the test because we want that feedback, right? But not every student's going to show up on a report card because they're not full academic year students, right? They weren't in the same school from September 30th until April 15th. So we have the data so that we can give feedback to the kid and the family, and we can support the student, et cetera, but you're not going to see them on a chart, right? So we tested them, but they don't show up as a test taker or in the proficient column because they didn't meet the membership rules of that particular room. So I bring that up because we have some school districts that are more mobile than others. And so we're a school district that our mobility rate has been increasing for quite some time. So there's a lot of in and out in some of our schools, in some of our clusters. And so while we're still testing those kids and again, using that data, you're not going to see that data on a report card because they don't meet the membership rules.
Okay. No, I just want to make sure that
Mhm.
I'm truly looking at
Yep.
apples to apples,
It is.
or at least an apple to a pear.
It is. It's apples to apples. Yeah.
Because they're
Yep.
similarly refreshing at the very least. So my second question has to do with academic progress in general.
Mhm.
So one of the ways that I know my students were able to assess themselves and their performance has to do with the grades. And I know that the more genuine the grade is, the better the teacher can assist the student to achieving the next stage of readiness, as well as the student knowing where they need to focus on, where they need to thrive on. During COVID, we created at the administrative level, not at the board level, although we did get a little involved in grading in the early parts with pass-fail during the initial onset, but overall grading is a function of the administration. And so my understanding is it was reported to us that there were certain graces being provided for by the teachers and with the students because we were in a virtual environment. And so there was a little bit of grace there as it related to when assignments get turned in, how they are graded, what percentage they have. Like it used to be a higher percentage of your grade than it is now. What has not been reported since then is what has changed for restoration of resuming normal education services. And so could you explain, because I know academic progress is based on that. So if I'm looking at how we move the mark, it would be good, I think, for us to know how grading plays a role in that, because there's your self-motivator right there. And we have not just had reported to us whether or not some of those differences outside of maybe an incidental email here or there of how we have resumed a more normal approach to grading. Because it seems to me the teacher, their hands are strapped if they don't genuinely know and cannot generally put a grade or an assessment to the student to give them to know whether or not they need the help.
And it's an interesting question. We just talked about that. What's the day? Monday? We talked about that at 8 this morning. About it's just interesting. Some of the grades that we've been allotting. And I think we're going to work together around what do we need to reel back on for the upcoming school year. You can't just peel that in the middle. We're 3/4 of the way throughout the school year. But I do want you all to know that, our expectation is that we're not providing crutches that harm our children. And I have been going in my assemblies when I'm speaking to students and helping them to understand that, like, everybody's gonna be held accountable to learn, right? And that's just the bottom line. And so we talked about it this morning about even from a grade standpoint, what can be read back, we don't also want to be in a situation where we're harming children because we've completely ripped the Band-Aid. So that is in conversation, and there's a reason why you haven't gotten an update, because we've continued on that path this year.
Okay, so then, and that makes sense, because although we were able to rapidly deploy it, you now have high schoolers that are in a new environment, grading environment, and that has to be carried out through physician. Is that what you're referring to? So we will have to develop a plan to correct the course. Is that an accurate summary of what I'm hearing?
I would say yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, I'm looking
Well,
at
that's
my
some good
team,
news.
but yes.
So that needs to be on the good news, because actually understanding where we're going and that we're moving in the right direction, I think that's some very good news. Thank you. I may have one or two other quick questions on the technical side.
Thank you, Ms. Corkadell. Ms. Schulheim.
First, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation and all of the information contained within it. I have just a couple of really quick questions for you. Back to the climate survey, I scribbled down safety, environment, community. What was the fourth component of the climate?
Relationships.
Relationships.
And then there's the fifth
Ooh.
additional one for educators.
And what was the fifth one for educators?
Instructional support, instructional feedback.
Instructional feedback. And I assume that question set is standard throughout the state.
Yeah. Ms. Halm, they actually have a sample set of questions that parents and students and us as stakeholders can go see on the state website. And they have basically sample questions from each of those domains so that you get an idea of what types of questions students are being asked.
That website is somewhat difficult to navigate.
It is.
So if
I can send it to you first. That's
Please.
easy.
Yes.
And if you Google Maryland School Survey, it's 2 clicks. But yeah, you got to have the right Google search and then you'll get there. But we'll certainly send you the link to it. That's easy.
All right, fantastic. And secondly, you mentioned an upcoming social studies exam. Can you
Sure.
expand upon
100%.
that and what's involved in that?
So we actually gave it last year. It was piloted, so it was field tested, basically to make sure that it's valid and reliable assessment, et cetera. So our last year's 8th graders, hang on, I got to go back because it's real lagging days. So 8th graders in the spring of 22, which are current 9th graders, okay, took the field test of the Maryland Social Studies Assessment, we call MISA, not to be confused with MISA. Try to keep up. It's hard. And so it was a field test. And so what they've done from that is now finalize the test. Our current 8th graders in middle schools will take that social studies test in May. And it will count on the school report card effective next year. The field test is done, the pilot is done, and it is now a test that we give in the state of Maryland.
Okay, so what sorts of topics would that include? I don't have an 8th grader yet, so I don't know what's on the curriculum. So help me out.
It's a great question that my friends in curriculum instruction would really be able to answer very, very well
Okay.
for you.
Okay.
So it is. It's a new test. It is completely aligned, obviously, to the Maryland College and Career Readiness Standards of 8th grade social studies. It's completely aligned to those state standards, and then, of course, to our curriculum. So they're all 6 through 8. Oh, it's cumulative.
Oh, great.
There we go.
So I would love to know what the high. Yes. No, I get it, but like what's involved in the curriculum for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So I only know 6 up until March 20th. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's where I'm at. Yeah. So if it's probably on our website somewhere. So just if someone can kindly send me a link to those things, that'd be
Absolutely.
lovely.
Yep.
And that's all I have for right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schulheim. Ms. Dent.
So first of all, I'm really glad that you all did this. I know it takes a lot of work to do this and do the deep dive, and there's no computer algorithm just spits all out this information. So thank you. But my comment is twofold. One, I do want to thank Dr. Bedell, all your team for just all the work of what you've done, which is inspiring to me. With I know what we look like going into pandemic, and I know what the pandemic caused, right? And then now we come back and we're back in school, but we've come with a different set of challenges. And then somehow or another, we got to get these students prepped and ready to put themselves in a mindset to even sit down and want to take an exam, right? So that's a motivational factor all by itself. And to have the results. So I say this out of love when I say that I'm more than excited that you met the state standard, but if you didn't meet the state standard, I would tell you don't kick yourself too hard, right? So do pat yourself on the back, clap your cartwheels, whatever you need to do, because we were above state standard. So kudos to all of you all that did that. So seriously. My comment is only one thing, is that I know we're measuring this. I understand the ESSER dollars and trying to get to them and everything. But is there any data that talks about where were you pre-pandemic measuring us against us? And I know that don't bring in any dollars. I'm saying that for a different reason, though, because, you know, Dr. Bedell is an overachiever. Top 5 in the state is a giant leap across space, right? Yes. Yes.
Right.
So I'm saying that in that drive. No, I know he's gonna get there. Trust me. I may not live to see it, but he's gonna get there. Yes, and I know that. But I'm thinking that measuring us against us, where were we,
Mhm.
right? And then how long is this? You know, what's that glide path to get us to 5? Right? Because if we measure us against us, I think we may be able to see we're not as bad as we think we are, right? You know, we just look, because I think we're looking great right now. That was one, just what we look like. And the other side of that is that it's just maybe an X. Last time we were talking about how we calculate the little house. I know I missed part of the briefing, but we're still talking about the house, right? Okay, so did we go back to Maryland to see if there's any way that they can change where they put the percentages at, or is that still off the table?
I think I've already talked. I'm sorry. I've already talked to the team about it. I think there are some things that are just static and there probably won't be any appetite. I mean, the first one that I questioned was the attendance factor. I think it's a very punitive way to have that as a part of the accountability system when schools have already been penalized, because when kids are chronically absent, they're already missing instruction, which means you're going to have negative impact in data in terms of your academic performance. And fortunately, I think we have maybe a different financing system, but in a lot of other school districts, when kids don't come to school, you don't get funding that day. So then you turn around, and because they haven't come to school, now you're being penalized with 15 points potentially over factors that sometimes are beyond the control of certain schools.
Okay.
And that's something that I will be looking to push at
So
some
you
point.
have to address that, though.
Yeah, we would have to address
Okay.
that, I think, as superintendents.
Okay.
And
And-
Ms. Dent, to follow up on Dr. Bedell, it's important to remember that our state accountability system is based on federal legislation. So
I
they're
didn't
not
know that.
ultimately in control. So we need to remember that when we propose a change that we think is good for whatever circumstance, that we ultimately will need the U.S. Department of Education's approval to implement that change, because it's federal legislation. Each state got to do its own accountability system. The House is ours. And so they've made some adaptations based on COVID. But Dr. Bedell and I are working on maybe making a couple of those. They made some 1-year exceptions, I'll call it. And we're hoping that we can get maybe a couple of those extended, because I don't think any of us believe that we're that far out of the disruption and the interruption that some of our students and families have experienced, you know, that 2+ years. So yeah, but we would need federal approval for any actual changes to the system.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, a phenomenal job with all of you guys putting this presentation together. Thank you.
And if I could, Ms. Dent, just a credit to everybody who was here before I got here, you know, to have gone through the things that this school district went through last year. I think y'all had some kind of crazy board meetings behind some of the COVID decisions and all of that. And to have the state report card come back and to only have 4 schools rated a 2, and then 2 number 1s, and the 1s will always be 1s. Their alternative schools shouldn't even be on that accountability metric, period. But to have 4 2s, and then for Mr. Dykstra to say 3 of those 4 schools are within range of moving up to a 3. There's a lot to be said about that, about the work that's been done in this district, and that's the reason why I do believe that we have opportunity to move up. And I'll say one more thing to your point about trying to go to a 5, because one of the things I said to middle school principals at our middle school meeting, how many of you know exactly if you're a 3, where are you within the 3 ratings of not only against schools in our district, but do you know where you rank in the 3s against schools in the state? Are you in the 20th percentile, 40th, 60th, 80th? Do you know why you're there? And do you know what you need to do to move up within bands within the 3? And of course, one of the overachievers, Severna Park, I asked the question, I said, you're the only 5 middle school in the school district. Do you know where you rank? He said, I'm number 3 in the state. I said, do you know what it's going to take to move into 2 or 1? Right. And those are the kind of conversations that we have to have as we talk about wanting this school district to go from good to great. You can't have any 2s and 3s, and those 4s and 5s. We really need to pack those, to get to where I believe we can get to.
Thank you. Mr. McGrath.
I don't really have any questions at this time. Hopefully my math score didn't bring the average down too far. I apologize for that in advance.
I looked at that entire data set and I was like, McGrath?
Mr. McGrath, I'm fairly sure Ms. Harding can look it up real quick, but we won't do that.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the confession, Mr. McGrath, and we'll hold you to that. Mr. Silkworth.
Thank you. I don't really have a question. I just want to make a comment. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Dykstra, Ms. Harding, Ms. Souter. We clearly have a connection from North County, and seems like everything kind of goes through North County. But this is an awful lot of work. This is, I know it's very challenging, but you've done a great job of presenting this to us. And as I read through this over the past week or so, or a few days, I would like to say I do agree with Dr. Burdell when he says that we need to do a better job of convincing our students that when they take some of these tests, whether it's PSAT, SAT, or whatever, that they really have to do their very best. I mean, I remember my days in the classroom, there were, I made it very clear to the students under my control that you'll benefit from doing your very best on these tests. And so I think that's a very important point. We need to continue to do that. As I looked at the star ratings, and I see we have a large number of 3s. Then I looked at the percentages, and I see the percentages at 45 to 59%. And it kind of says to me 59%. Is that really that good? So we need to make sure that all of our schools have plans. Every school has a plan, a yearly plan, a plan of instruction. And we, as Dr. Burdell said, as a school, you need to know where you are and what needs to happen, what you need to do in order to go upwards, not downwards. And so I just thought I would just mention that. I greatly appreciate everything you've done. If this has been a flight and you guys have been the crew, you've done a marvelous job. It's been smooth sailing so far. So I greatly appreciate that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Silkworth. Yeah, a lot goes through North County with a detour to Annapolis. But anyway.
I work there too. Both represented.
I
You're
student
not
taught it on
You're not the only one with issues, Dr. Bedell. Um, so I did have, obviously, as I said earlier, this is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I think this is, on my time on the board, I don't recall a presentation this full on our data. Obviously, it's been a strange few years. And so thank you very much. This is hugely helpful. Obviously, one of the things that's apparent in, it's at least to me, in our data is we're stronger at the elementary level than we seem to be at the secondary level. And so I'd just be curious for, does anybody want to offer any general thoughts on that? Sort of what you see in that, what opportunities you think are embedded in that data, to either Dr. Bedell or the staff?
So, Dr. Tobin, thank you. Yeah, and that's also similar, unfortunately, across the state that we've seen. So let me answer it this way. I don't know if we did, but if we needed some data to show us the impact that the pandemic has had on learning, particularly to your point, of our secondary students and the importance of schooling to our adolescent students who are changing emotionally, socially, academically, frontal cortex is coming in.
Yeah.
If we want to really say, hey, do you have any data to support the interruption and the disruption I think that's what you get.
Yeah.
Then I think you layer on a couple of key points that we tried to highlight, but I appreciate the opportunity. We had waivers for 2+ years. And so we got away from, particularly what does a teenager say when you hand them a test? Does it count? You can't even finish. Mr. Silkworth is correct. You can't even hardly hand out anything that said, does it count? Right? And so we're just getting back into this world of accountability, back to some normalcy where there may be some predictability. And so I think what we're seeing, particularly at the secondary level, is a couple things. Number one is we're not back where we want to be with academic achievement, because I'm not sure it's been the focal point. And Dr. Bedell and I had this conversation, right? We have so focused, appropriately so, on the social emotional health of our kids, the supports that we bring our kids, the belongingness, the relationships, and getting them to transition back to some predictability in their school life. And so I think, if you add that to this is very lagging data, then I think you get part of your answer. And we also know that there's been a tremendous impact on our English learners at the secondary level. Okay. So that's why we're really anxious to get our next set of data, because arguably we've certainly had some disruption. We've had some problems that we've had to solve in 22-23, but I would argue that they were perhaps a little bit less than what we had to do in 21-22. And so we're really anxious to get that data. And our message to principals, and we've been very fortunate, we've been in front of elementary principals, middle school principals, we'll finish with the high school principals this week, to have these same kind of conversations that Mr. Silkworth is referring to about what is the plan, right? How do I use this data meaningfully? But we're also, to your question, really asking them to think about this data set as baseline data.
Right.
It's not the first data we have. We have it from 18 and 19,
Right.
But circumstances were so dramatically different. There's value in that data. There's value in the 18 report card. There's value in the 19 report card for certain. And as Ms. Dent said, comparing us to us over time, right? But we're really encouraging them, hey, this is baseline, make some adjustments, but be ready to pivot when that next set of data, because now we're really going to have two complete data sets over a better period of time. They're actually, because it's so lagging, it's pretty close together.
Yeah.
March till, I'll be optimistic, Dr. Bedell, November, right? We're gonna have two data sets fairly close together that then I think we can even dig deeper, more insights, and really looking at, okay, where are we really, and where do we maybe need to pivot? But I think the answer to your question is really in the developmental age of the age groups you're talking about.
Right.
As a former middle school and high school principal, I think we have now some pretty direct evidence that says, wow, the pandemic really impacted that age group a lot. And I think we have the data to show it.
And I'll say another piece to that too. You know, when I've had a chance to just keep looking at this data, one of the things I noticed, you know, in order to get into the top 5, you probably will see in the data that we're probably a 6%. There's a 6% of a variance from being in the top 5
Yeah.
across the
Yeah.
board and all
Yeah.
of these indicators. So we're not that far away from where we want to get to. I do agree with the waivers. You know, I think the fact that for some of our students not understanding how much this really matters and going in and putting forth your best effort could play a role in here. But I will also say too, you know, when I look at the math scores, it does make me wonder. You know, I have to question cut scores and things of that nature. That even in the middle school math, the highest performing school district only had 28.62% of kids score proficient. I mean, I'll now, if you're telling me 72% of our kids in a school district that tends to be on the top in everything are that bad in math? These are the questions that we all have to be asking, you know, to be able to unpack. And without having the item analysis data, it makes it real difficult for us to drill down to see if there is a pedagogical issue on our part or curricular misalignment or professional development misalignment, because you still cannot drill down to get an understanding of why did 80% of kids choose C when they should have chosen B? Where did we go wrong with teaching a linear equation? We don't know. So that's the part, like, absent of having everything that we need, you're still out here in some cases throwing arrows in the dark, you know, trying to figure out how do we be very methodical and intentional in moving the needle with this at a much faster rate. So, and then the last thing I'll say to you, when we get the strategic plan written, it comes with a scorecard. So I've already started letting building principals know when we set our goals, you know, in exec close about the superintendent's evaluation, that permeates through the whole system. So everybody will have a clear understanding of where we're going. But, you know, that scorecard is going to also help us stay focused around the work that we need to do on all of these different indicators. So I think there's going to definitely be some more alignment coming down when you think about like what's happening with our secondary schools compared to our elementary schools.
Yeah, I'll just add, I don't really have another question, just a couple of more comments. It immediately made me, looking at this, just immediately jumped out at me that, and I know there's been a national conversation about this for a while, you know, that we really need to be looking not just at the cut scores, but what is going on with math instruction. I mean, something needs to be addressed here, I think. And I say that as a, you know, I've taught ancient math, but I can't do algebra to save my life. So anyway, and the other thing is, and this will continue to be on my wish list for MSDE and federal if necessary, I do think the way attendance is dealt with in this, we have large portions of our county that are highly mobile. And Fort Meade obviously brings the kind of mobility into this county, as do other aspects. I think if you look at some of the other counties that do well, you'll find less mobility, for example. And I think that, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I also think it would be tremendously valuable to have, at the very least in the percentile report, schools with similar different demographics. because I think that is just such a glaring issue in this, and continues to be a glaring issue that continues to be kind of embedded in this data, and nobody, since I've been yammering on about it, I haven't heard much movement, though I did raise it in a round table with the state superintendent, and I know he indicated that he was sympathetic to that issue. And then, of course, also we want to be able to compare schools based not just on the absolute, but the trajectory. You know, who's moving and what's the slope. And I think, and that includes the schools that are at 5.
100%.
Right? I want to know
100%.
who's produced, I mean, whatever the markers are, I'm not sure National Merit Scholars are the best and only indicator. But for example, a 5 in one county that's producing 10 National Merit Scholars a year versus maybe a 5 in our county that's producing 1, what's going on? So those are just some markers that I think are valuable, and I hope will be.
So the good news is coming. Back when we were under AYP, or Adequate Yearly Progress, under No Child Left Behind, there was a little button on the state website that said schools like me, and it went in and took a look, and then you could compare your report card. So we're being promised that that's coming. We don't have it yet, so we are, excited that you are going to be able to do different, what I'll call different levels of comparison, right? How do I look in the county? How do I look compared to all schools in my level at the state? But then to your point and Dr. Bedell's point, how do I look compared to schools like me, right? And so we're doing that. We've also started a data community thanks to this amazing team to my right. And we have an online resource center. And so in the absence of the state doing that, we've actually done it for our schools. And so you can at least do it internally. We don't have it for state schools like me, but what we did do was produce a resource for all of our schools that we're showcasing at these principal meetings, where they can go on to this resource and very easily find a couple of schools that are very similar to them very easily. And then they could go on and look at their report cards, and it's all in one place. They don't have to go anywhere else. We call it the data community, and it's being very well received by our stakeholders. So we're really excited about that.
Well, I am delighted to hear about that. I think that's a tremendous addition. So thank you
So
very
good news.
much for that. And as with many things, I suspect some other counties may be following us in that.
We are sharing our house with a number of districts, not just here in the state, but there are districts outside. So that creation has caught the eyes of a number of other districts too.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. For those who wish to have any additional questions, Ms. Corkadell?
Yeah, I'm going to bring this down to a more technical level.
My girl.
As opposed to the more academic, scholarly conversations. So just real quick, on page 15, the English language proficiency, are ELs calculated in that? And if so, how does that end up impacting us as a district? Because if you have an English learner coming in, they're not going to be able to demonstrate proficiency. And so the schools that have higher levels of ELs, I presume, are getting hit harder in the points, or is that
not necessarily because
okay.
of the way they
or
choose to calculate
or they
it.
remove, or they exempt from the
They're not exempt. So
Okay.
it's in between your two comments. So there's more than one way for a student to count in the English language proficiency room. So it's 10 points for all schools. What you're going to notice in the membership box there is that we definitely need to have 2 scores on this test that we give, right? So, depending on when you come in, we have to have a score, and we have to have 2 scores to kind of see where you go. But there's 3 ways for you to count for a school, regardless of how many English learners that you have in your building, right? One way is to hit, I'll call it a sliding scale, a target. So if I come in with literally no language, I'm going to be on the lower end of that scale, and therefore my target is also substantially lower. And so if I hit that target, even though it's lower than your target, I still count for the school. But if I start at a higher level, then my target's a little bit higher for what we call 1 year's worth of growth. So there's a table basically, or a chart, if you will. And then what happens is, depending on that first test score, wherever you land there, then we kind of know where we think you should be for us at the end of that. And I think, Melissa, there's 4 levels to that chart, 4 different differentiations. Yes, there's 4.
Oh,
So
okay.
you can be on the chart in 4 different places depending on what I'll call your starting point, if that makes any sense. The other way to count for the school is, of course, what we all want: hit the goal, right? Hit that mark. So we'll give you credit for growth, but we'll also give you credit for just hitting where we think you should be. And then, of course, you get credit if a student gets exited from the program.
So it would be fair to say, I'm doing a little myth busting actually, because I always hear that,
Mhm.
well, the reason the school doesn't score high is because of, and this is one of the contributing factors
Mhm.
that's identified. It sounds to me like, although it could be a contributing factor overall, it is being compensated for in the model, at least for the most part. So you
There-
can't hang your laurels on, well, that's because we are a school that is predominantly EL.
Yeah, they're
driven.
certainly trying. There's certainly differentiation to account for that. I think the other part that we have to, I think there's 2 other parts that we have to recognize for this room. And I'll also, if my colleagues who work with schools more closely than I do may have some other insights as well. So the first point that I will make to you is that when we look at our English learner population, it also tends to be a little mobile. So we have English learners that we're supporting, and we're giving them the test, but we may not have 2 test scores. So that doesn't hurt the school. It's just you can't help the school because I don't have 2 test scores. So maybe Jason's doing really well, and his English language proficiency is really coming along quite nicely. And I do okay on the WIDA access test. But that's still my first year, so I can't help my school because I only have 1 test score. There's no way for me to show growth. So that's one consideration. And the other consideration, and we put it up on the screen under one of our barriers, is we have a staffing shortage. And there are unfortunately certain areas, certain content areas that unfortunately get hit a little bit harder than others with respect to staffing shortages. And that happens to be one of them.
Gotcha. Okay, no, well, that was a lot more detailed than
Mhm.
I thought it was going to be, but in a very good way. Thank you. My second question is just a simple one. We started our virtual high school.
Mhm.
It's kind of launching in. My understanding was, like, as Crofton needed to get a couple years under its belt, that the virtual, am I presuming correct, that the virtual school
Next year.
next year
Mhm.
that'll be their first report card,
Mhm.
correct?
Yep.
Okay, and they will be
Did I have one?
measured,
Oh,
and
Ms.
they
Harding
will be
corrected me.
measured just as a live and in-person school.
Please hold. We have one.
So they do, they just got, she's pulling it up on that data community. And so they do have, yep, sure enough, they have a report card.
So then, because then they'll have a test to do
Correct.
the comparison to next year.
Yep.
Okay,
So they don't have anything from 18 or 19, but they did get their very first report card.
great.
Yep.
Well, I look forward to seeing how that's progressing too. Thank you very much once again. No further questions.
Thank you. Ms. Shawley? Ms. Dent? Go home and study your math, Mr. Montgomery. Anything further, Mr. Silkworth? All right, well, I think that concludes our evening. Thank you again. We really, really appreciate it. I think this is a great service for us and for the community. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for having us.